Rachel Stevens is a Senior Analyst at RedMonk, where she covers emerging growth technologies and markets while helping clients understand and contextualize technology adoption trends. In this conversation, we discuss tech debt, layoffs, software development trends, and more.
Rachel, welcome to my luminous, whimsical, mesmerizing podcast about cloud things and other stuff. How are things going today for you?
Things are great. I'm so delighted to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, do you want to briefly introduce yourself to the audience? Who is Rachel Stevens, and what do you do for RedMonk?
Yeah, so I work at RedMonk. My name's Rachel Stevens. So those are the two key ones you got right off the bat. where people probably get lost is who the hell is RedMonk. We are, if you've ever heard of like Gartner or Forrester, like some of those bigger firms that help do market research in the technology space, we're like the like fancy way to say it is we're a boutique version of those. The other way to say it is like we're a teeny tiny 8-person version of those. But we're a small firm, small but mighty, and our job, as we see it, is to help the industry contextualize and understand technology adoption trends. But we specifically try to do that from the lens of the developer and the practitioner. So a lot of the times we know software is a team sport. You have to have a whole bunch of different teams, and everyone at the kind of from people working on the software all the way up to your leadership team have to be in alignment. So we get all that. But the point of view that we care about the most is that developer point of view of what is it like to use the tools and what does it mean in terms of how technology gets adopted within the enterprise.
Yeah, I think that's so great. And I was actually just giving you some kudos, before we started recording. I'm all about like clear and concise mission statements and just, simple elevator pitches. Elevator pitch shouldn't take me, 5 minutes to read. If it does, might not be an elevator pitch. And in the RedMonk about section on the website, you sort of make that distinction, pretty awesomely, where you make that distinction between like enterprise sales folks dressed to the nines, which are the decision makers of old, and then I think you called the new decision makers the Kingmakers, which are your coders and t-shirts and flippy floppies, writing the software that makes the company money. So you all engage really at the developer level, which is awesome. Instead of the mapping the traditional big vendors to the senior execs type stuff. Did I summarize that okay?
No, I think it's perfect. And I think it's good context. So even though we're an 8-person company, it's worth saying that like we're not a startup company. We've been doing this for a couple of decades now. And so our founders actually kind of started this where they would go to these conferences and the CTO would be up on stage saying, this is the stack we're using and this is what we're doing. And then they would, the founders would take developers out for beers afterwards and ask them what they're actually doing. It's like, I don't know, like we've got Mongo all over the place. Like, of course we're using open source, like things like that. And so they were, if you're thinking about like going back to 2002 when the firm was founded, that was pre-cloud, early open source in the enterprise in terms of kind of commercial viability for a lot of these companies. And so the initial signs and things that the company originally saw is that like the leadership team didn't realize all of the things that developers were using to make their lives easier and get their jobs done. And that's kind of the founding thesis of the company is what is it that developers want to use? Because it's probably in your enterprise stack. Like if they do want to use it.
Right on. Okay. Yeah. So before we move on to the fun stuff, if you will, you're in the Denver area, aren't you?
I am.
Awesome. So everybody I talk to from anywhere near or around Denver is like into rock climbing. Are you a rock climber?
I haven't been rock climbing in about a decade. So I'm going to put an end to your trend. I'm so sorry. I do like hiking though, but like I'm a foot on the ground hiker, not a foot on the wall hiker.
That would be me as well. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Yeah, I was in Denver last September for a conference, and I met so many rock climbers. It was just like nonstop. I was like, wow, everybody's a rock climber around here.
There's a lot of people with outdoor hobbies in the state.
Pretty awesome. I mean, I love the outdoors, don't get me wrong, but kind of like you, like my feet on the ground or in ice skates. I play hockey. So that's kind of my thing, my jam.
Like one of my worst, like persistent nightmares is fears of getting my teeth knocked out. So we'll have to unpack that later. But I could never play hockey.
It happens. It happens a lot in that sport, especially if you don't wear a cage.
Yep.
So another thing I wanted to add. So I've read, quite a few of your blogs, and just thank you, first of all, for making reading really easy. So you have some great writing. It's really well put together, and it's just not the dry, like, oh, I need to go like take a walk and, think about life after I read this thing sort of thing. Like, you write really well, and you wrote a really good blog, with a really awesome name, I might add, about tech debt. I think it was, so maybe the real tech debt was the friends we made along the way, I think was the title. Such a good title. I saw that and it stood out to me. It's like the first thing I clicked on. I was like, okay, that's awesome. And I think this one was written right in the midst of, the COVID roller coaster that we all so fortunately had to go through.
I think if I'm remembering right, that might be kind of that first wave of tech layoffs that started to hit us. I think this one might have specifically been that first wave of Twitter layoffs. But this one was just kind of talking about the socio-technical systems that we've built, and what kind of weight do we carry as humans in the system, rather than just the code and processes and everything that connects it all together.
Right, exactly. Yeah, but so you sort of said something. I'm probably going to pivot now a little bit before we come back to tech debt, but the layoff stuff, I remember it's so funny because, I've been working in this whole tech thing for like around 20 years now, I guess. And layoffs in the days of old, they still happened a lot. They happened quite a bit, and they were scary. I think social media now, just things spread like wildfire, and things are also very scary. But like, I remember the first massive layoff that I saw working for a big company. I wasn't impacted, thank goodness, but I remember they called us all in this big room and they just made an announcement. Nobody knew it was coming. And it's like, okay, now we have these boxes. You have people that are going to escort you out. And that was it.
It's
like,
brutal.
that's how it went. It was absolutely brutal. And then you're sweating for the folks around you. It makes it, back then when you were working in the office, it made it a lot more real when you see the person next to you that you've been working with for who knows how long, and you got to wave goodbye.
Yeah.
It's treacherous. But one thing I was going to ask is, do you see, like, I know that, in conversations I've had over the years, like, there was a lot of, I think, overhiring in the time of free, easy money, and okay, yeah, you want to do this gigantic, VC round, and here you go. So I think a lot of companies overhired leading up to COVID, and then I think during COVID things really got difficult. And I think part of what, I could be wrong, but I feel like part of what we're still seeing are phase layoffs that are based on some of that overhiring. But I don't know. I don't have any research or data to support that.
I don't have any of my own data other than just having read lots of people's hypotheses about this. But I think you are absolutely right that the tech industry in the era of low interest rates in the 2010s had just enormous, I guess it's just investors in search of growth, which means that you don't really have to worry about that profitability side of things, which means that you can make a whole lot of resource decisions that wouldn't be rational in other environments. And then you add on top of this COVID, where the entire world basically moved their entire life online for the better part of a year, which created some really skewed views of where growth is coming from and where growth is going. So I think people further made some interesting choices there. And so then you come out of the world where people have returned to more or less a more normal pattern of life. And then you've also have a different interest rate environment, and all of these things combined. And then you add AI on top of that, which has created its whole own layer of like, what does resourcing look like in the future? And all of those together means that people are very much changing how they are thinking about hiring.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it is funny too, seeing the swing back, like the polarization of hybrid work versus, oh, you have to come in the office versus, oh, you can stay at home. And like, I feel like in this, for some reason or another, like the past few years, there's this whole movement of either it like has to be completely one way or it has to be completely the other way. Like, I feel like we've sort of lost that idea of having a balance in some of these areas. And I feel like, I worked in healthcare. I was in healthcare like right around the time that COVID started, and seeing like, I don't know, it was just kind of funny from my perspective, seeing tech folks complain, when they had to come to the office, but you have these frontline workers, you have these folks in hospitals, they don't have an option. They got to be there. They have to, for these things to keep going. And yeah, sometimes I feel like, I mean, even myself, like in my mind thinking, oh, I got to go to the office. What are they thinking? And then just kind of like sort of resetting my expectations of this stuff based on some of those things. Like, I need to quit. I'm becoming spoiled. Come on.
I'm
I'll go into the office
100% in the same boat. It's like I've worked from home since 2016, and like I don't know if I could go back to the daily like hour commute. I really couldn't go back to wearing slacks again. Like I used to work in finance. I don't think I'm meant for fitted waistbands anymore. All of those things are like 100% positions of privilege, and I recognize that. But I think I'm totally not going to remember the name because this came out earlier this year. But Atlassian put together a really lovely report on like what it means to be a successful remote and hybrid team. And it's really like full of so many just practical ways that they have found that their team has worked well together and the things. And so like when you're saying like you either have to be all one or all the other, they're not entirely wrong about that, because if you're doing it all one way, then you can fully rely on like everybody getting information the same way. So we're either all sharing information online or we're all sharing information in person. And so if you don't have like a collaboration strategy that is reflective of a distributed workforce or even a partially distributed workforce, and you have some people in person and you have some people online, you're just going to have things that get lost in the shuffle, or things where you have asymmetrical information across your teams. And so if you haven't thought out your communication strategy and you all of a sudden are trying to navigate this hybrid world, like it really is a big cultural adjustment that has to happen in order for people to be successful.
Yeah, I remember it's so funny. Like one of the teams I was managing at the time, I had folks that, and we were I mean, there was a certain time frame where we couldn't allow this through COVID, but I had folks on my team that wanted to come in and work from the office, even when there was nobody in there. And that kind of threw me for a loop. But then, kind of when I was talking to a few of them, I kind of understood, where they were coming from, why they, they had this whole separation of how their life, their structure of things. They work at work and they do home things at home. And I think one of these folks had a bunch of kids, around the house. So that can kind of contribute to that as well. Wanting a quiet place to be. I totally understand that. So yeah, there's a human element to it too. Like maybe, I don't know if it's personal preference or what you would.
Yeah. I think there's just so many things that it can be your family situation. It can be your living situation. Like, do you actually physically have the space to work? Like, some people really do just operate better in separate spaces. So it's, this is where like home is here, work is here, and never the twain shall meet. And so I think all of these things are valid opinions, and you just, as a employee, need to find an employer who shares those opinions. So it's kind of like a dating game. You have to match. How do you work, and how does your employer work?
Yeah, good points.
But now we're in a world where employers are just kind of unilaterally demanding the return to work, and so then you don't get to date anymore. You're just arranged marriage you're in.
Yeah. Well, there's trade-offs with that too. You will lose some very valuable people if you go all in that way. Yeah. So there's trade-offs and there's consequences to those types of unilateral decisions, of course.
Absolutely.
So tech debt. So back to that blog, that really well-written blog. Has your perspective kind of changed at all as far as tech debt is concerned? Because I think in that blog, you were at the beginning, you were kind of pondering, okay, I think you were reevaluating what tech debt meant to you at the time or how it had changed based on those layoffs. But yeah, any changes as we hit the midway point of 2024?
So like I mentioned, I have a finance background. So like when I originally started contemplating tech debt, I was kind of in a place of like, this doesn't feel like debt at all, at least in the way that I understood debt from a financial perspective. So a lot of times when you're talking about debt and finance, like you're talking about like a mortgage or a bond or something like that. There's other forms of debt, but like those are going to be the most common ones that you encounter. And in those scenarios, like you have a known amount of principal, you have a fixed interest payment, you have a fixed interest rate, you have a fixed repayment schedule. Like it's not at all what we talk about when we talk about tech debt, where like we have made these decisions hastily and then all of a sudden there's going to be an unknown repayment window when things blow up. Like it's a different theory of risk. And so like I think a lot of times when we try to talk about tech debt in the technical world and try to communicate with our partners and stakeholders about what we're doing, like we're trying to convey that we are making a trade-off between doing work today and doing work down the line, and it's going to be an unpredictable amount of work when and where that happens. And so a lot of the times I think what we're trying to convey is risk. Like risk is what matters. And so I think sometimes like, so when I originally started thinking about debt, I was like, this is kind of an incomplete metaphor if you're trying to talk to your business colleagues. And then when you added like the socio-technical like layer on top of that, like what are our people actually adding to this system? And what does it mean to pull people out of the system? And then it just gets even more convoluted. And so I guess where I have landed is that tech debt is really complicated to talk about. So I don't think any of us have a good handle on it.
It is. I'll tell you what. So from like a sort of like a technical leader perspective, like my sort of definition of tech debt was, okay, like we're just, okay, like again, I worked in healthcare. We got mainframes for days, COBOL's all the, in the driver's seat, with the software. There's certain things that are easier to modernize. Data is really hard to move, but we want to innovate anyway. We want to use cloud. So, okay, we're building like new things in cloud, like web front ends, but a lot of our data and systems are still in the data center. And we have a lot of ideas of just sunshine and rainbows and lollipops from leadership. They go to some conferences, they talk to some other CIOs and CTOs and stuff, and they come back with some pretty big ideas. And a lot of times you have to go through some of those experiments and prove out that they're not going to work before you can go back and say no. Because let's face it, if you're a technical decision maker, you can't really just say no to the some VP of engineering or something.
Yes.
You can make your case and try to push back a little bit, but there's a point where you have to stop and say, oh, we're going to do this thing. And then as you're trying to pivot and you're doing these things, you have teams that are pivoting to do a thing. Every Zoom call you're on, you're paying all these folks to be on that Zoom call when they could be doing other things. And, there's just each year that an enterprise goes on, they have like a budget and they try and do so much just within that time window. And then it's like reset.
Yeah, that's the really fun, like last 20% of our sprint to an airport ad that the executive saw on the way home. It's always a great time. But I do think that what you're saying, I think resonates in a lot of ways because it's kind of, have you ever heard of like the theory of pace layering? I think it's Stuart Brand. Now I'm going to have to double check this. We might have to correct this in the comments. But basically it's like different layers of the world. And this also applies to your technology stack, move at different layers or different rates of velocity. So like if you're thinking about like your data layer can be really, really intractable, hard to move. Your JavaScript framework layer at the top probably could change every 2 weeks if you wanted it to. I hope it doesn't. But so you have this a sense of like different things move at different rates. And so like if you start to think about technical debt and like kind of like an archaeological dig of like going down, because it's those ones at the bottom that you have to kind of start to figure out like how can I shift what's down here without like making my Jenga tower that's built on top of it all fall down. And so it's really like this exercise of digging down, figuring out like where is everything coupled and where can I decouple it and how can I start modernizing in pieces. And that's kind of like the one version of like technical debt is like how can I start to like change things. And so if you're an enterprise leader and you're like, I want to make sure that we are changing, we are evolving, because we do need to be doing this constantly. Like it's not a one and done thing. Like we should be evolving our stack all the time, but we shouldn't be evolving all layers of the stack all the time. And so if your enterprise like strategy is like your executive comes in and like tries to rip something out of the bottom, then that's no fun. But if you have an enterprise leader who's willing to engage in these conversations with you and you can start to come together in some kind of coherent strategy about how we're moving forward, then that's more useful.
Yeah, communication is a huge part of this for every level. That's why I think it's so much harder for an organization that's so heavily matrixed across, like you have like so many layers of management, because a lot of times what happens, maybe you have like the compute side, the network side, the security side, and decisions have to go up to a leader and you have to make a decision. And then you have, it's almost like decision by committee at the top or the VPs, and it slows things down so much. And one thing I saw a lot is like when we were adopting at one company, we're really going, all in on microservices. And what we came out with at the other end was some really distributed monoliths under the guise of microservices. And it's very easy to do when you have to take into consideration all these different layers that you kind of talked about, because you just can't simply, it's not a cloud native thing. You're not starting from scratch. It's not greenfield. It's still very brownfield that you have to take into consideration.
Yeah. And I think there's like the two ways versus like I have two, my app is monolith. It's a big mud ball. Everything is too coupled. And then you also have people who've swung way too far the other direction, where it's like I have just this massive web of dependencies. I have like duplicated microservices. I have way too much going on. I have like traces that go way deeper than they need to go in order to get things done. And so like, I think it's one of those things where it's like, you can talk about them from either extreme, and finding like the correct balanced architecture is just, it's a challenge.
Yeah. And it's got to be complicated especially for new developers coming in to just finding really, like, I remember when I was coming into the industry, you're really trying to find out who you are still in terms of how you fit, if you're even going to like what you're doing. And a lot of new developers, it's, back to the point of, what, I want to be careful about what I put my time into. What programming language should I focus on? And, it always used to be a thing of, okay, what are you best at writing? What's really valuable? But some of these are coming and going now. And there are some that if you learn them and you're efficient, you can, fit into different niche areas or even be more hyperscaler focused and such. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I do have thoughts on that. I have many thoughts on that, actually. So,
right.
So RedMonk has historically tried to, so we've done this since, I want to say 2012. So we have a long history of just trying to track what we can see about program language usage in the wild. And we fully acknowledge this is not a representative sample of how programming languages are used everywhere. Like you mentioned, like COBOL's still out there. That doesn't really show up in what we're doing, because what we're looking at is GitHub and Stack Overflow. And COBOL exists not in those places, or at least not so much in those places. But our general goal is like, what are people talking about? What are we seeing in public commits, and just kind of tracking them over time. And so it's imperfect, but it's just like, rather than just trying to deal with what we're hearing qualitatively, is there any kind of quantitative metric that we can try to apply to what we're seeing? Not perfect, but if you look at it over time, it provides some interesting trends. And what we see a lot that is interesting is that there's remarkable stability in those top 10 languages. So like Java, JavaScript, Python, like PHP is still up there, C++. There's like all these languages that you've kind of seen and have heard about, like those continue to have accretive value in the industry. And then you also see that there's up and coming languages. So it's like you see Go, you see TypeScript is one of the ones that has come up. So it's like all of these ones were Rust. Like so you can see trajectory of up and coming languages, but you also see that there's really a lot of stability. And so I am of the opinion a lot of times, and especially in the age of generative code assistance, where it can help you transfer or transport your ideas between languages in a way that's easier than it's ever been before, is find a language, focus on learning programming concepts, and then adapt as you need. But don't get super hung up on learning just the right language, because I think that that's not going to be, it's a little bit like trying to time the stock market. Pick something that's reasonably well known, that solves the problem you're interested in, and then trust that you can learn other languages as you go.
Yeah, 100. I mean, I remember the first programming language I ever used was, I guess Bash scripting could technically kind of be like programming, but Perl was big when I started out, on the sysadmin side. And then honestly, transitioning from Perl to Python was beautiful. It was so nice. It was amazing. So I've been, more or less Python with some Go thrown in there these days, a little bit of TypeScript. But yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. If you learn the fundamentals, I know you have functioning or functional, object oriented, there's different things, different, architectures and stuff, and different trade-offs and things that you have to make. But yeah, you're absolutely spot on. Learn something that's valuable, you're good at it, you focus on it. But the fundamentals and all the software design patterns that underpin those languages, those are the things that are really important and are transferable.
And the other thing that I've learned from trying to pick up programming languages, and I program so poorly that we should probably not even mention it.
You don't use ChatGPT? Your
do.
coding could look really good.
I'm not gonna. So I used to do DBA work, and I'm not gonna lie. I really just don't write my own SQL queries anymore. I throw a general schema and what I'm wanting into ChatGPT, and then I sometimes have to tweak it. But I really love not writing SQL anymore. It's delightful. Some of those really confined tasks, does a great job, and to find tasks where you can easily verify the outcomes. Did this query run, and did it give me what I'm actually expecting? Verification still an important part of that. Yes, but what I learned in trying to learn programming languages is having a specific problem that you're trying to solve is the most important part of all of the learning things. Sometimes don't just pick up a language and try to learn it for the sake of learning it, but what are you trying to do with it? And I think that's a really important part of the learning process.
That is so big. That can't be, I mean, it's kind of I picked up when I started working at a desk full time. I was I've got to pick up a hobby where I can do something with my hands or I'm going to go crazy. So I started woodworking.
Ooh.
And let me tell you, if you start out and you're oh, I'm just going to think, okay, how do you do this? Or how do you do? No, you need a plan. You need something that you're going to build that's going to solve some function so you can connect the dots between the tools you're using, how you're using them, reading a plan and the outcome that you want. Just jumping in and, Leroy Jenkins, it doesn't really work that well.
Nice. Okay, so we're going to have to add woodworking to our hockey conversation after we stop recording, because I have more questions there.
Right on. Yeah, that'll be fun. It's been one of the most amazing. I started maybe 10 years ago, and I got really into it because it's just so peaceful. It's just, Anyhow, so what do you think, as far as developers, so I get a lot of folks reach out as far as hey, should I do this? Should I do that? Folks that are new in the industry and really what they want is they want to, not that I'm someone that has gone out and done a lot of things, but they want somebody that's been around for long enough that can basically maybe give them some tips for how to maximize their time and help them, be more successful quicker. They kind of want to dodge the potholes, if you will. But it's got to be harder coming into tech as a developer today than ever before. Because, I mean, let's face it, first of all, everybody wants to be a developer. It's that's the number one trade. People want to write code. They want to write software. And there's so many different platforms. There's so many, it's just got to be confusing. Do you have any tips for how a developer might think about how to start going from crawling to walking?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. My heart goes out to people who are trying to break into the industry right now, because it is, like, macroeconomically speaking, it's a challenge. And then we just have all of these complexity things that you've mentioned, and then a whole lot of weird hiring vibes right now around it. I think one of the things that's interesting in the AI space is that a lot of the AI vendors are trying, I think, deliberately not to talk to people about, like, this is going to take your job. Like, this is like human in the loop. This is going to augment your work. It's going to make it so much easier. But, like, I feel like a lot of the companies who are buying or listening to these AI vendors are hearing a different story, where it's like wink and a nod, like, yes, we're just going to augment our workforce. It's just like, no. It's like you have a lot of people who are not hiring juniors in a way that they assume that, like, Gen AI is going to, like, take over the drudgery jobs. But, like, I think that's really short-sighted, and I think we're going to find that that is not successful in a lot of places. So I think what you really need is a place where you can learn. So Charity Majors just had a post that came out yesterday about software being an apprenticeship industry and the importance of learning from one another. And so if you're a junior or someone who's trying to break into this industry and you don't find that opportunity for yourself, like, maybe you can find it via, if you've done a boot camp or something like that. Maybe you can find it if you're lucky and you can get hired and you can learn on the job. But, like, you can also try to find this in open source. Like, if you can find friendly open source communities and you can start to build a public facing credibility, you can start to learn from what's already happening elsewhere. And I'm not going to say that all open source communities are super friendly to newcomers, but there's plenty that are. So if you can find ways where you can learn, grow, and then also just have a track record of working in public, like, those are all great things. And so I think if I were in a place of trying to encourage people to get to that place where you can start to make a difference, I would consider thinking about what can you do in open source.
That's really good. And you're so right about the communities. I just had a guest on that's CNCF ambassador, and she was talking to me about just what it meant to be in the observability group, for the CNCF, kind of going into some of the details and some of the value. And the beautiful thing about that is, like, I've been in this, I'm not an ambassador, I'm not in any way part of, officially part of the CNCF community, but anybody can join the Slack.
Yeah.
You can talk to anybody, and they have to be the most friendly community that I've ever I'm not to say that I'm even a part of it, but I'm there. If you have, they're just so friendly.
They are
and
friendly.
It's so easy to talk to these folks, and you don't know until you try.
And I was just reading, because it was the Kubernetes 10th birthday last week. But the way that the community shaped that technology is such an intrinsic part of why that technology was successful. And so, like, I think the core of the CNCF ecosystem is kind of founded on that ethos. And I think it carries into a lot of the different working groups. It's not to say there's not bad actors or not problems with some of them, but it's by and large a pretty welcoming community. Python, you mentioned being a Python person. I think Python is also one of those communities that is very welcoming. So, like, PyCon it's a great event. So, like, all of those things. So I would recommend checking out either language-based communities, like open source platform-based communities. Like, check it out, see the vibes, and see where a lot of them will have things tagged as, like, good first commits for newcomers, things like that. So you find your way in, and you can also look on these Slack communities and see if you can find mentors.
Yeah, that's a good thing right there. So I never, when I first started in tech, I never officially asked for a mentor. But I had one. So I worked with someone that sort of took me under their wing, and he was kind of a rough person. He was rough around the edges. He was ex-military, very rigid. He did not sugarcoat anything. You just got directly what he was thinking all the time. But he took me under his wing. He taught me so much, and just spent so much extra time with me, and a time when I needed it. And it, when the influence was really important in shaping the direction I went in my career. He's a good person. And now, that was in the time where social media and, like, it was not easy to get a mentor. You basically had to go work somewhere or go, email someone. It was just very hard. But now there's so many folks out there, you can reach out, there's so many community events that you don't have to pay for, local meetups. There's just so many opportunities now that you can go and just talk to people, and, sort of begin that journey. And open source, you're right. It's such a good place to start out. How do you think AI is gonna play out over the next few years? Like for me, like it's kind of like, I don't want to say it's a complete nothing burger at this moment, but it's hard. I think it started with, okay, AI can solve every problem that we have out there. We've got to just look at everything through the lens of AI ML. So I think it's going to start getting more real here soon.
So I have lots of thoughts on this one too. I think one of the things that's a little challenging about AI is that AI is following Web3. And so like, I think Web3 kind of went through like a huge rise and fall in hype. And so I feel like AI kind of feels like, to have it come like right on the back of Web3. And so it feels like super hyped and it feels the same as what we just went through. I do think that the core of the AI possibility is more substantial than what we saw in like cryptocurrencies. I do think that there is a lot of undue hype right now. We are very much in a hypey phase of this technology. But I think that the underlying promise of reducing tedium in at least, so like I think the LLM thing was like, we want like a general purpose platform that can do a whole lot of natural language processing. That's kind of what kicked off this wave. And that will that's getting us to where we are now. I think the next wave is going to be like hyper specialized models that enterprises can use in really specific ways. And I think that's what's coming next. And that's where the interest is. And so I think kind of where we are now in terms of what technology is available and what enterprises are actually excited about, there's a bit of a gap. But I do think that it's a gap that is something that we as an industry will probably overcome. So I do think that we're going to see AI models augmenting us as teams, as humans. But I think that it's going to look a little bit different than it is today.
You're totally right about coming off the coattails of Web, just right after Web3. I remember seeing some of the funding announcements for some of the Web3 companies. Like, whoa, like they're investing how much in this Web3 startup? That's crazy.
Yes.
And then you don't even hear about it anymore.
Yeah.
But you're right. AI definitely solves real problems. And of course, there's a lot of, bullish VCs out there that are dumping a lot of, capital into some of these startups. And that's probably going to continue. But at the end of the day, they're going to get weeded out pretty quick because they have to build something that's very valuable or profitable, or they're not going to make it past the next round.
So I think for me, one of the things that's interesting about AI is if I'm an enterprise and I have like this AI FOMO, I need to figure out what my AI strategy is because my board is saying I have to have an AI strategy. Am I going to go give all of my enterprise data to a company that has a $20 million seed startup and no terms of service? Or am I going to oh, look, Salesforce has AI now. Like all of my cloud providers have AI. Like I think the incumbents are actually in a place where they are most likely to clean up on this AI windfall just because people are already trusting them with their data. And I think that trust with data in this phase is going to be tremendously important. And so I think it'll be interesting to see, but I there will be some of these VC investments that pan out and come through, but I think you are right that there's going to be a lot of weeding out.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, so it has to be profitable for the VCs. It has to be, founders and, the really rock star engineers that are at these startups doing cool things. Like there has to be a reward at the end of the tunnel, or it's just not going to be. It doesn't work for the consumers that are buying a thing, and it doesn't work for the folks that are building it. It sort of breaks the system in a sense. Yeah. It'll be interesting to see what happens. It is so funny, the Web3. It is a pretty interesting comparison. for sure. It's just the timing of it,
And I mean, it really is like the hype around AI is like people are legitimate to be skeptical about the hype. But I do think that we'll probably come out the other side starting to see some interesting and viable use cases because we're already starting to see those.
Yeah. I mean, even transposing, you mentioned this earlier a little bit, but back to my Perl days, my good old Perl days, I actually took a Perl script that I had that did some things with some on-prem infrastructure, F5s, load balancers. And I put it into the good old Chat GPT and said, hey, can you transpose this to Golang? And it did it. And it actually worked, which was really crazy. Like we would hire agencies to help transition code bases to, newer languages or different languages for different use cases. And that's pretty compelling.
Yeah. So one of my favorite ways about thinking about whether or not AI is useful for a specific use case, it comes from Zach Akil, and he talks about the IVO model, which is immediately verifiable output. And so you either need to have kind of, as the user, enough information and understanding of what you are doing to understand whether or not the model has output something useful, or the model needs to be trained in a really specific data set so that it can't hallucinate, or you need to have like a model that can source something out so that you can check. There's a lot of different ways, or you can, the easiest way is that the model will output bullshit and then blame the user because the user was not the person who was supposed to be using this model. But like, as you're thinking about Gen AI, it's thinking about like that IVO. It's like, can I verify the correctness of this? And if it's something where I'm familiar with this script, I know what it's supposed to do, and then I can see if it does this in the new language, then that's great. But I think if we're in a place where we're saying, like, dear junior engineer, go learn to code using Gen AI, and you don't have that foundational background knowledge, like, that's where we're going to get in trouble.
Yeah, totally agree. Well, this has been an absolute blast talking to you. And I'm going to link in the show notes your blog for sure. And I noted the Atlassian.
I gave you Atlassian, I gave you charities. I name dropped a little bit more than I intended. I feel like there's so many people who say smart things about them that I cannot take credit for all these smart things.
Yeah, well, the Atlassian thing, I hadn't heard about that. I'm interested to read that myself, so I'm definitely going to link these things in the show notes.
Perfect. I will provide links for you, and looking forward to talking with you more, because this was a delight.
Absolutely. And where can folks find you?
Oh, in this weird fractured landscape, maybe just come to the RedMonk blog and go from there, so that I don't have to tell you like 19 social media platforms to come find me on.
So you're not on Twitter like day in and day out, just tweeting constantly?
I am there, unfortunately, but like I don't feel good about being there. So like,
I hate it.
It's the worst. So like, come find me on redmonk.com. Me and my colleagues post there frequently, and we also have links to how to find us on social media elsewhere.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And we will have to do this again at some point.
Oh, this was a delight. Thank you so much.